Okay, how about now? Am I here now? Give me a moment. Hopefully this is. Arrgh. Yes. Okay, I'm live now. Good. Okay, so yeah, I have to always remember that I have these sort of separate stream keys I use for the masterclass versus the MuseScore Cafe. So I apologize for the fact that it still confuses me because I got too much going on in my head to keep track of. All right, so let me start over. This is the music masterclass for today, January 21st, 2021. My name is Marc Sabatella, director of the Mastering MuseScore School, and I'm looking forward to just jumping in and talking about a whole lot of things that have been on my mind lately. There's actually way more going on in my head right now, which is why I can't keep some things straight, like which stream I'm broadcasting on. There's so many things going on. I just want to get to what I can, and there's always time for more next week, and for comments in the course in between these sessions. So now that I think that I'm broadcasting and everything's okay. All right, so pop out my chat. All right, so let me tell you some of the things. So obviously we've been talking about Counterpoint a bit lately, and I'll be looking at things having to do with that. Someone asked about mixed meter last time. Dean, was that you? Yeah, yeah, so I'm having trouble just keeping track of everything that's going on. So I know Dean, you had a piece that I was going to look at, or so I need to get to that. But I'm gonna just talk about some of the things that I want to talk about. So when the subject of mixed meter came up last week, I thought about the different things that this can mean, and I sort of challenged people if they wanted to write something in mixed meter to deal with it. And I thought about the mixed meter that I have used in any of my own pieces. So the first thing I want to show here is one of my pieces that it's mixed meter in a very particular sense. It's not establishing a repeating rhythmic pattern. It's just creating a flow of music that doesn't have a really specific meter to it. So I drew bar lines in where I thought it kind of made sense to draw them in based on the phrasing that I envisioned. Frankly, the rhythms that are happening here, I also had to play with a little bit what I'm calling a quarter note versus what I'm calling an eighth note, because when I play this piece myself, it's very, as it says, freely kind of rubato. Mystic Reverie is the title of the piece. Colleen, I know you've played this piece. So I'm just going to play so you can hear the MuseScore playback of it and get this one sense of what mixed meter can be. And then I want to talk about one particular relevant example. Right, so that is this sort of opening to this piece that I wrote that eventually goes into other things and has 3/4 happening throughout most of it. It eventually gets into a solid groove of 3/4, but the beginning is meant to be very free. And by the way, if you're noticing, oh, gee, that sounds awfully funny. It sounds funny because this is the playback that came from MuseScore 1, because that's when I wrote this piece was before I was using MuseScore, but I entered it into MuseScore, and that was MuseScore 1's playback. So by mixed meter, meter meaning time signature, it's the fact that it keeps changing between 3/4 and 4/4, and then there's a 2/4 bar, 3/4, 4/4. It's moving back and forth in a fairly kind of free way. It's not sticking to one time signature. This doesn't stay in one time signature long enough to even establish a time signature at all. I really could have notated it with no bar lines at all. The bar lines just sort of help understand what feels like it's the start of a phrase or a downbeat. So that's kind of where my bar lines got drawn. Um, so this type of use of mixed meter as a way of kind of notating something that's really kind of rubato. Um, it's really not in time at all. I'm not thinking time. I couldn't play that to a no. I could play it to a metronome. I wouldn't want to play it to a metronome. You heard a metronomic playback of it. My own playing of that piece is a lot more free rhythmically, or a lot more rubato. But I tried to write out some of the things, like some of the passages. My original notation of it, these were quarter notes. Bum 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 bum. Right, that was all quarter notes when I wrote those out originally, and then I just said play it a little faster. But when I tried to arrange it for an ensemble and tried to get them to play it fast enough, they just couldn't wrap their brains around getting the quarter notes as fast as I envisioned them. So I said, okay, well, I guess the answer is write them as eighth notes. They're not really eighth notes, they're just faster quarter notes, but by writing them as eighth notes, I got closer to the sound that I wanted, kind of right out of the box. When I write this now as an arrangement, score it out for musicians, if they just read the rhythms exactly as written, it comes closer to what I meant, and then I can tell them, well, play this measure a little slower than eighth notes otherwise would have been. And actually, these eighth notes also are a little bit slower. So, this is something that that you can do in writing things out to try to capture a rhythmic feel. So compound meter is actually different still. So what you're talking about here of 1 meter in one hand and one in another, let me think if polymeter would be the term for that. Polymeter. So 3/4 and 4/4 alternating would be a form of mixed meter, a regular mixed meter. This is an irregular mixed meter. Compound meter is something different. Compound meter is a meter like 6/8 that we count 1, 2, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. So that's, it's, we call it 6/8 because technically you could count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but we don't. We count 1 and 2 and. We see these big beats of groups of 3. So it's like a beat, a dotted quarter note in 6/8 is the beat, and then it's subdivided into thirds. That's the definition of compound meter. So 3/4 is not compound. 3/4 is triple. Compound has to do with the division of the beat. So once you've identified what your basic beat is, if it divides in eighth notes like this, then we call it simple meter. If the basic beat divides into thirds, then we call it compound. So 3/4 is 3 beats, but each beat is divided in half. 1, 2, and 3, and 1, and 2, and 3, and. So that's the difference. So triple and compound are a little bit related, because if you play 3/4 fast enough, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, then it can start to feel like 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. So it's possible to write anything in 3/4 as 6/8 or 9/8 or whatever else. It's possible to take 3/4 and write it in compound meter by taking all your quarter notes and turning them into eighth notes, and taking your dotted halves and turning them into dotted quarters. But that is the distinction. And there's many pieces of music that you can get two people, like some people writing out, say, a song, My Favorite Thing. Some people write it in 3/4. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Other people write it in 6/8. 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2 and 1 and a 2 and a. So it's totally possible to think of triple meter 3/4 and compound meter 6/8 and so forth as being essentially the same, in the same way that anything in 4/4 could have been written in 2/4, right? Or cut time. And so that whole world, 2/4, 4/4, and cut time is essentially the same thing, just a different way of writing it. 3/4, which is triple meter, and compound meter are essentially the same thing, just different ways of writing it. So that's how I would say it. Okay, so this idea of this mixed meter here is very free, very rubato. And this was on my mind yesterday. If any of you saw Lady Gaga performing and you probably saw my notice that I want to talk about this today a little bit. Lady Gaga did this version of the Star Spangled Banner at the presidential inauguration yesterday. That was really interesting. As I listened to it, I was like, wow, there's some extra beats in here. There's stuff going on. I wasn't really sure what was going on, but over the course of the day, it started fascinating me more and more, and I was researching to see what I could find out about it, and eventually just sort of transcribed the piece for myself. And so many of you have seen that, but I want to show you my transcription of it, which I have here. So I will post this into the chat. Lady. Okay, so this is my kind of lead sheet reduction of what she's saying. So I'm going to play a little bit of of this, and then skip around and just talk about different aspects of it as it relates to the subject of mixed meter. So the first thing is, if you're not familiar with the piece, it's normally in 3/4. Doing it in 4/4 is something that happens when people do like kind of pop versions of it. You know, the Whitney Houston version is pretty famous, and other people have done versions that feel very much like pop music. This does not feel like pop music at all. This is a very straightforward kind of classical with some slight jazz overtones. It's really in my world a lot as far as this arrangement, and it's very strict metronomically and all, but it's in 4. So right, so it's in 4/4. And nothing unusual about the fourness of it for the most part. But there's a few things that happen that are worth noting, like the very next measure. This rhythm, bum, 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 this particular subdivision of 4/4 is, it's not unique. It's a common rhythm. Anyone who plays Afro-Cuban music, this is half of all the rhythms in Afro-Cuban music are based on this. Bum, 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 and then is the answering phrase to it. So this 1 and of 2 and 4. Boom. So it's a particular way of subdividing the 4/4, but it's still 4/4. But then there's something interesting that happens when you get to the second portion of the song. So what happened here is rockets, red glare. Well, this is normally in 3/4, as I've said, and glare would have been the downbeat. Rockets, red glare. And you could have notated it that way. I could have chosen to notate this as a 3/4 measure. But if I did that, there would have been 5 beats left over here. And that's a perfectly valid way of doing it. 3 and then 5. I could have notated it as a bar of 3 and then a bar of 5, a bar of 3 and then a bar of 5, and then you would have seen some mixed meter here. The reason I didn't notate it that way is because the chord really doesn't change until here. Changed. Then again, change. And this time it wasn't so much a change as it was a bass thing that happened. It happens in like the bass instruments. But it was a clear downbeat happening. So this is, I wrote it still I wrote this out in 4, but you could think of it as a 3 and a 5, and then another 3 and a 5. But after that, it very clearly goes into real 3. 1, 2. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? So you could have chosen to say, well, it's 3/4. I'll just keep this in 3/4, that 6/4 bar. But if you did that, then was is like on beat 3, and it's kind of straddling the bar line there. So the phrasing to me feels more natural if we call this 6. So this is making a lot of the same sort of decisions that I made in talking about my piece Mystic Reverie, except there's nothing the least bit rubato about this. If you listen to watch the video of this, you'll see it's a military band doing all the drum, all this, very metronomic drum cadency stuff behind this. It is completely in rhythm, not the slightest bit of rubato. Actually, the drums drop out right here. Proof through the night. For those 2 bars only, the drums drop out. And then we get, after that there, then it goes into 3 again. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now this is the only measure that I said that the drums drop out, but it's very clearly in 3. Here, I could have called this a 4/4 measure with a fermata. For that matter, maybe even a 3/4 with a fermata, because the drums kind of chill out a little bit here where you can't really necessarily say there's exactly 5 beats in that measure. It's harder to say. And from here on out, it becomes more of that rubato kind of feel. So I'm just going to play from here on. I'll play from here up to the end. Now, on the actual performance, when Lady Gaga sings she actually sings both of those 2 notes a beat ahead. So it's like she's phrasing this in 3/4 instead of 4/4. I'm going to say that was a mistake or a conscious choice, but you can hear the rest of the band playing the melody here. It was clearly written to be 4/4, so she just, chose to anticipate. We'll give her the benefit of the doubt on that one. But in any case, there's all of this mixed meter here. It's not, in this case, rubato, because as I mentioned, the drums are mostly continuing throughout. A little bit, not so much in here. But what it is it's trying to make certain points about the lyrics. The flag was still there. Normally, as Stephen Colbert commented last night, that line is not a cliffhanger. But in this version it was, and that's just because of the circumstances, I think. Yeah, of course, if you hear the actual version of it, just go find that on YouTube. It's good. What am I wrong about? Anticipation? But if you let me think. Okay, so what did I say? So Ben, so let me back up to where you're saying. I think you're adding extra beats. So yeah, no, actually, Ben, listen to it with headphones on. The only place where she is off sync is these 2 notes. They are literally the only place. Every place else, she is completely in sync with the instrumentation, other than those 2 notes. Are the only 2 notes. I got my headphones on here. I transcribed pretty carefully with it. Now, someone mentioned, and maybe it was Ben who mentioned Adam Nealy, and Adam Nealy definitely. He just posted a very in-depth analysis of all of this as well, with his own version of this, and his version is almost identical to mine. There's a couple differences in how he notated some of the chord symbols, but he made pretty much all the same choices as far as the meter changes, other than at the very end here, where he notated a couple things differently. So one of the things that when you're transcribing a performance like this, you can choose to transcribe what you hear and notate the fermata somehow, or you can try to transcribe what you think was notated. I've kind of gone for that. I've kind of gone for transcribing what I think was in the written arrangement. So I'm not sure what I said. Anticipation. Anticipation is when you arrive on a note ahead, like this anticipation here. This you could see as maybe this is what you were talking about. This anticipation of beat is like it's an anticipation of beat 1. It's a note that arrives on beat 4. So yes, this is an anticipation. I don't think I called it anything different than that, but that's what it is. Here, when she did this anticipation, yeah, she did an anticipation there. You could say that, but I'm pretty sure the written arrangement didn't call for that anticipation. So Ben, I'd be curious to know what interpretation you don't you're not necessarily disagreeing with, but there's a lot of room for debate about a lot of things. Like I said, whether to call this a 3/4 bar followed by a 5/4 bar. I mean, clearly it's in time. It's not a fermata. That percussion is absolutely straight on the money all throughout that. But where you choose to put the bar line, you could flip a coin on that. There was a debate on Twitter all about that. Should we call this 3/4 and 5/4, or should we call it 4/4? I went with it this way, but whatever. It's not an important distinction. And similarly with whether I call this 6/4 like I did, or whether you call it 3/4 with one note that happens to be phrased across a bar line, whatever. You could choose to notate it that way. I'm trying to notate it the way that I think is the most natural, but yeah, there's definitely multiple choices here. There's a couple chords also. I mean, it's not a jazz piece. It wasn't written to have chord symbols. It was completely notated. And there's certain chords that the way what I called the chord, you have to choose, oh, well, he omitted this note from the chord, added that note to the chord, and there was this passing tone here. What am I going to put on the chord symbol? I tried to put chord symbols that I thought captured the basic sound. No anticipation in bar 32. Here. Well, okay, so here's where I'm saying just the instrumentation. The instruments are very clearly going bum, bum, bum. That is what is absolutely happening. Let's just listen to that part of it. Why not? That is absolutely what's happening in the performance. That might take too long to bring up just because I'm broadcasting.
I feel like I need to blow off some steam. Let's go.
Yeah, I don't want to hear all this, so let's skip that. So yeah, Gonzalo, I'm not sure what brought you here, but if you're not interested, then feel free to go back to Fortnite. That's fine. Adam Nealy, by the way, calls this last chord here that I'm calling a G. I'm calling that G over G flat. And all my other jazz friends say, yeah, that is absolutely a G chord there. This is a flat 2 chord. It's a cliche jazz ending, other than the fact that on this version there's a G flat drone throughout that I'm choosing to notate this way. But a lot of people, including Adam Nealy, when they listen to this chord, they say, oh, no, that they're actually hearing a minor 4 chord there. And some of you know how much I love that minor 4 chord, and I love how it gets used right here. That's the minor 4 chord, this C flat minor 6. It's a beautiful chord. I love the chord. It's used to brilliant effect, but it's not the chord that's here because this chord has a G natural in it, and that minor 4 chord would have had a G, C flat, E flat, G flat, and this is just a different chord that doesn't have that G natural. But some of the other notes are definitely the same notes. That are in that other chord. So in any case, but he for whatever reason wasn't hearing that G there in his version, in his analysis. Okay, so yeah, and you can definitely write it out however you want, but I have no idea if this was how it was written originally. I'm just trying to get inside Michael Bearden, who was the arranger of this, trying to get inside his head, imagine what I would have written if I wanted it to be performed that way. If I had wanted it to be performed the way it got performed, this is what I would have written. And I think this would have been the most effective way to have gotten that performance. So whether or not this is what was actually written, I can't really say. So anyhow, that's some talk about some mixed meter and having to think through some of these issues of where are your downbeats. Do you allow this to be a downbeat, so, and then cause that to be mixed meter as a result, or do you just let this note phrase across the bar? Here, I let the note phrase across the bar because that chord came in on a downbeat that gave me a reason to call that beat one. In the 6/4 bar, I didn't do that way because the chord came in conjunction with that note. So if I'd wanted to call this 3/4, the downbeat would have been this quarter rest, and that just didn't really make sense to me to have then that chord change in the middle of the measure. But you could have totally written it that way. That's totally legitimate. So, when we talk about mixed meter, there's nothing about this, though, that's a repeating pattern. So in that sense, it's like my Mystic Reverie. It's a succession of measures that each individually capture something about the phrasing that we're trying to get. Maybe in Mystic Reverie, trying to capture something about the rubato. Here, something about holding how long to hold this note out, and using the meter to create longer notes, but it's done in time in this case instead of rubato. But in other cases, mixed meter might be used in the example that was given, someone gave earlier, alternating 4 and 3, which is really, we could just call that 7. So you could either have notated it as 7 or notate it as alternating 4s and 3s. And that's like a really common thing in the modern jazz world, modern rock world, to have these sort of odd time signatures, 7s and 11s and things like that. And also in Indian classical music, it's huge, having 11s and 13s and things like that. So, yes, I do love minor 4 chords. This is an absolute true. Um, the use of mixed meter here and in my piece Mystic Reverie is sort of a different character than that type of use if you're trying to just convey 7 by alternating 4s and 3s. That's mixed meter also, but it's mixed of a different character. And so there's all sorts of different situations in which you might possibly have some mixed meter going on. All right, I want to just flip now back to MuseScore and open this one piece that I had downloaded earlier that's super cool and give me an opportunity to talk about something else completely different, going back to the subject of counterpoint a little bit. So I was talking about, here it is, this arrangement here, Michael Gold posted to MuseScore.com. I should get that arrangement up. Where do I have it? I have Music Masterclass. It's this one right here. Sing a Song of Song. All right. So yeah, Adam. By the way, Adam Nealy. I'm not like super familiar with him. I know he's like this, kind of legendary figure now in this world, and I haven't really watched as many of his videos, but I did watch his entire video on that Lady Gaga thing, and yeah, he's basically talking the same language as me, other than just a couple little minor differences in interpretation of thing, and the one chord I think he actually has wrong. Other than that, we're basically saying the same thing in slightly different words. So this piece here. I'll play it here because he's actually got some really cool sound fonts that he's using here, and it sounds better than when I play it. So I'm going to play it from MuseScore here. All right, I'm going to pause it there. This piece is by the saxophonist Kenny Garrett, and it's a fairly faithful, this is what the original version sounds like to the best of my memory. But then I'll show you the part that's the sort of unique part in the arrangement. So this so far is just a very kind of faithful recreation of what's happening. We have this boo da which, by the way, is that exact rhythm, is it not? That I mentioned in that Lady Gaga one, the ba da da dum, 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 dum, and here it's ba it's twice as fast, but instead of dotted quarter and then eighth tied to quarter, this is dotted eighth and then 16th with eighth and then 16th and then eighth. So it's the exact same rhythm. Boom, It's the same rhythm divided in half. And so here you get to see it in its, the way it's often used in maybe a jazz context. And this becomes what's called a motor rhythm throughout the piece. Boo, and it happens throughout the piece, and it creates this sort of rhythmic ground for the piece with the drums also sit on top of. And the melody is the ba da 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 ba boo ba dum. And by the way, this anticipation here, Ben used the term anticipation earlier. This is textbook anticipation here. Ba da 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 ba boo ba dum. And then the downbeat happens after the arrival of the last note of the phrase. Last note of the phrase is on the and of 4. And then 1 happens immediately after that. This is an anticipation. It is a note that is played in the melody, or sung in the melody, whatever. A melody note that occurs, or it doesn't even have to be a melody note, but a note that occurs, and it's before the downbeats. And then tied over. I mean, lots of notes happen before the downbeat, but in this case, it's tied over. Or maybe there's a rest there. Ba ba da 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 do ba dum. If there's nothing, if there's just a rest, that also counts as an anticipation. So this use of anticipation, I mean, you almost can't write jazz without having anticipations like that. It's a form of syncopation. By putting a note on the and of 4 like this, and then not following it with a note on 1, that creates a syncopation. And that particular type, where you're basically arriving on the final note of a phrase before the downbeat, that particular form of syncopation is called anticipation. But all of that is just like fundamental to jazz. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and it builds layers. Having that second alto fill out the harmony. But then what he does, there's another section in here I'll play here. So as far as my talking about the word counterpoint in relation to this piece, so far it's not very contrapuntal. It's a little bit. Because this repeating rhythm, if you remember last week I talked about a static accompaniment. Well, this is static. It's an interesting rhythm, but it's the same thing over and over again. It ceases to become interesting in itself. It's a ground. Now we're having a melody that's very specifically ba-do-dum, ba-do-dum, right? So it's filling in the gaps between this one. So now this alto part here and this tenor part here are kind of working in conjunction in a particular way that is feeling a little bit contrapuntal. But what really gets down to it is, I'm just going to skip to the meat of the matter. There's a lot of really nice stuff that's happening in here, but I want to focus on the part that, because then there's an improvised, well, I don't know if it's, it's a solo that could as well have been improvised. But here, let's get into it a few bars before. Okay, here we go. It's the return of the melody. All right, and then I'll pause it there because now we're back finally to just the original texture. So the stuff that's going on here, this is definitely defining, is a fabulous example of the kind of counterpoint that I'm talking about. And let's get inside a little bit what's happening here so you can you can see things. And I don't know, Michael, are you here? Don't know if Michael's here. I did talk to him a little bit about this, but so we have well, let me just start it again. So here we're hearing basically two different melodies. Right? That melody there, and then in fact, at this point, oh, good, Michael, you're here. Yes, excellent. So this is just a wonderful arrangement. I think you did a fabulous job. Feel free to tell us, in the notes here, just tell us in the chat anything that you want to focus on, attention on, or ask about, or anything. But so this melody, boom, bum, bum, ba-dum. Bum ba bum 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 ba boo bum. I'm trying to exercise my own sight singing skills here. That melody is not this melody, right? So this isn't an imitative form of counterpoint. Then we have this. Oh gosh, yeah. What's happening is I thought I created a version of this where I changed the sounds because, of course, you have your custom sound fonts, and I'm not hearing them because I don't have them loaded. And I did go through at one point and change these all to be the correct sounds. But I apparently didn't save that version. So I need to do that real quick. So hopefully you're typing some stuff in that we can respond to. All right, that's good enough. So now we should hear. I was getting sounds out of the drums before. I guess I have to change that also. Standard. I thought I actually had convinced myself that worked before, but maybe it's the cowbells that don't work. Yeah, there it is. All right, save again. All right, so here we go. Okay, and then we have this other melody comes in. Right, this is a different melody, and yet the other parts continue. Right, the soprano repeats that same line, and the alto repeats the same line. We're just layering another part on top of it, and so we've layered that tenor part on top. In fact, I'm going to switch to continuous view at this point. Make it a little easier to follow what's happening. And then the next phrase, we add a fourth part. Now, this other part, which is another just different thing. But the tenor, everyone else is kind of repeating their previous thing, right? We're adding new parts to what's happening. There's a particular, let's see, the alto is the beginning of Kenny's solo. Yeah, I kind of figured it was the case that the lines here came from other places. So thanks for saving me the trouble of figuring that out. Yeah, so what about the other lines? Were they lines that you composed, or were they lines that you took from other places as well? Either way, it's just worked really, really well. But I'm definitely curious about it. This particular style of counterpoint, and so when I say this style, we have a repeating figure. The soprano keeps doing the same thing here. Da 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 da. da, da. Okay, whatever. I can't sing. But that line keeps repeating. And then this line, the second part, ba, 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 da, 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 right? That line also just keeps repeating. And then when the third line comes in, it keeps repeating. And then the fourth line comes in. This kind of staggered thing we have, each person has one part to do, and then you layer another one on top, and then you layer another one on top. This is a big tradition in Afro-Cuban music as well. I mentioned that boo as a rhythm that comes from Afro-Cuban music. It doesn't just come from there, but it's so associated with it. It's what's called the clave rhythm, and the clave rhythms boom bum 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 bum, or the converse one bum bum Either way, those two rhythms are what's called clave rhythms, and there's other variations on them, and so this piece, by virtue of the fact that it started off with boo, it's establishing a certain connection to the Afro-Cuban or Latin music world in general, even if it's not really, in a particular Latin style. But this idea of having this layered section here, this is what would be called the mambo section in a salsa arrangement. In an arrangement for a salsa band, a dance band, you would have one section where you have a horn line that starts doing something like this and repeating it, and then the next horn line builds on top of it, and then the next horn line builds on top of that, and then maybe a singer starts riffing on top of that. That is the mambo section of a salsa piece. And so what's happening here is very akin to that, and I don't know if that was at all conscious or not. Yeah, okay, so Michael, this is a good observation, because this is what I want to talk about. You want to keep, when you're writing this kind of counterpoint, in which some of the lines are kind of given to you. This line here is the line that came from Kenny Garrett's improvised solo, and everything else he's trying to layer on top of it. One of the things then you want to do is make the line sufficiently independent to feel independent, but you can't ignore the other line either, because you want to make sure you're not that you're representing the chord the best way you can, and not creating dissonances other than where you want dissonances, and creating them where you do want. And you want to. The good thing about this also is it's assumed that the original chord progression continues throughout. So all you have to do is write a new line that follows the original chord progression, and then make sure it lines up at appropriate spots to give you the sound of the chord. So this is really an E chord that's happening here. So you don't have chord symbols anywhere here, but you can look at the symbols here. We have, these are, yeah, good word, concert pitch, good. And then there's an E chord, and then a C chord, and then a D chord, and then an E chord, right? That's the essential. Let me just go to letter G. Do you all know that you can do that? Control F to find, and then it gives you a little search box here. You can then type in a measure number or a rehearsal letter. So so yeah, we have an E chord happening here. Then C, then D chord, and then E chord. And so all you have to do is capture that. And I say all you have to do because, well, capturing that when you don't have a rhythm section, but somehow conveying the sound of it in a reasonable way is definitely a challenge. So you've made the choice here at the beginning that all you are telling me about that E chord is really, you're just telling me about that fifth. You're telling me about the E. You're not telling me about the rest of the chord until beat 4. And I think that's great, because that allows it to start simply and build more. Had you filled out the chord immediately at the beginning, it's too much too soon. In fact, from the too much too soon perspective, I would say if you wanted this to feel more mambo-esque, what I would have done is put in a version of it that doesn't have the alto right away. In other words, just start off with the one line against cowbell. I'm not saying it needs to have that at all, but that's sort of the classic. If you're going to build, starting simply and then building from there is definitely a good thing. And this is a very classic way of doing it, literally one instrument at a time. So you've started off with two instruments, but you wisely, I think, kept the texture so close to being unison in that first measure that we're not aware. It doesn't feel like too much too soon, because otherwise it could have felt like too much too soon. If that had been this measure, right? Although even so, even in these, there's enough repetition of pitches, that A repeating and this A repeating here, that it feels cohesive. And this line here going from the B and then hitting up to the D, and this line also hitting up to that D. There's some commonality between these lines that helps them stay feeling almost like one and a half melody lines instead of two melody lines. It feels, yeah, almost like there's not quite two lines. So I think that's especially, yeah, it's just a brilliant choice there to have two lines, but not the fullest statement that you could have made. It's when the third voice comes in. So this is the first time we get to hear either the third or the root of that E chord. So and by giving us that in the lowest octave, that E, it's not that low, but it's low enough, it's lower than these guys. This is the root of the chord, and so we're hearing it that way. 3, 2, 1, mi, re, do. And hammering that E a little bit, while this guy's hammering the B, we're really hearing that E chord. Now, I think this works really well as is, but if you talk about wanting to tweak things, if this were a different piece and I was writing it differently, I would consider the possibility of creating lines that weren't quite so much emphasizing just one pitch. In other words, that was a good way to get the effect of because even here when the third line comes in, we only get that hint of the third of the chord. The only G sharp we get is here and here. So we still have very thin texture. But it's when the fourth line comes in. Here, we finally get a little more G sharp. Now here, I would say the doubling of the G sharp here is maybe not as effective. This line, bum boo bum bum boo dum. Oh, that's really brilliant, right? This is. I gotta solo this line for a second. This is like this hemiola figure, right? Gotta hear that one by itself. I soloed the wrong one. Yeah, I soloed the wrong one. So is that your line too, Michael? That's like a great line there, and it's great because it's the simplicity of it. It's very rhythmic. It's almost like a line that might have been played on a set of cowbells or something like this set, right? It's like it's a percussion type. It's a very rhythmic line that's more about rhythm than pitch. So it's this one motif that keeps turning around where it is in the beat, and you can tell it's turning around where it is in the beat just looking at the beaming. Right here, the E to the G sharp has a bar line between it. Here, the E to the G sharp is connected by a beam. Here, the E to the G sharp is neither, right? There's not a bar line between it, but nor is it connected by a beam. So this is what's telling me that its rhythmic position in the measure keeps changing, and then the chord changes to G. So part of me wants to say, well, gee, the G sharp doubled here is not my favorite choice. However, that said, now that I understand what that tenor line is trying to do, you didn't have a choice, I don't think. I don't think there's another way to do that. I mean, maybe to have not chosen the G sharp here for the first tenor, and maybe figure out how to refigure that line so the G sharp comes in there on beat two. I don't know. Or you just live with it because whatever, it's over within a 16th note. Who cares? But when you said that you spent a lot of time finessing these things, I feel your pain because these are the sorts of decisions that you have to deal with when you're doing this sort of thing. You want a line that has integrity in itself and yet also uh, fills out the chord the way you want it to fill out the chord, and in the particular case of this line, does this does this really particular kind of rhythmic thing going on. Okay, cool. So let me just see. That's progression. Yep, all the lines are originals. Great. Yeah. So that yeah, there you go. So yeah, you're absolutely seeing the same. I think you probably made the best choice that could be made, in the context of what you're doing here. And so, when I'm looking at it, I have to like ask myself these questions, and then, maybe the answer is no. I think that's the right way to do it. And yeah, and so if you could look at a Bach chorale and see similar things, there may be a place where he introduces a parallel fifth, and you're like, oh, Bach, how could you? And then you realize, yeah, but there, when I actually see what would be involved in avoiding that parallel fifth, I realize Bach really didn't have a choice there. I'm not saying that there is a Bach chorale that contains a parallel fifth, but I'm pretty sure there is. Um, so, not that these are parallel fifths, but just things that you might look at and think, oh, can I do better? And then you try and realize, no, actually, this is the best thing, the best resolution to a problem. And so having that double G sharp that's the best resolution, and I support you 100% on that. Yeah, yeah. I just like how all that is working. And then what happens is you see he's unwinding the counterpoint. Right? We had four parts independent here, but then he starts bringing it down by still having four parts, but they're not so independent anymore, are they? Right? The top two parts now combine. We basically lost the second part there, the alto part. The alto is now doubling the soprano. So we've cut the alto out of the mix, but he didn't actually take the alto literally out of the mix, just took that independent line out of the mix. Because if he had taken the alto itself out and just given him rests again, like the way the tenor had rests to start, right? The tenors had rests to start. This is a very thin texture. There's only two horns playing plus the cowbell. Could have used more cowbell. I'm kidding. That's a joke. So here, it's like, well, we don't want to thin out the sound. We still want four instruments plus cowbell. Cowbell's an instrument too. We still want the same number of instruments playing because we don't want to get quieter and thinner, but we want to simplify the texture. So he's keeping the alto there, but having it double the soprano. So great choice. And now we thin out one more. So at that point, now we have three horns all playing that same exact melody. And then it starts switching out who's doing what a little bit here. So now, we bring the melody back in, but this line, which was the line that we lost. No, that's the line we just had, sorry. But now it's doubled by these two instruments while the alto is bringing in the original melody. So now we have two different lines happening. The original melody here, you can't see me pointing at the screen. The original melody in the alto and tenor 2, and the soprano and tenor 1 having that one counter melody there. The counter melody that had come from the solo to begin with. So that was a really nice way of breaking the texture back down, simplifying it to prepare us for the outhead. So I think that just worked really, really marvelously. So One thing that this reminds me of, and it gets me an opportunity to work in the last name drop that I wanted to do here. I mentioned, if you saw, I think I mentioned in the email or in a tweet or somewhere, Sammy Nestico. Sammy Nestico, for people who aren't jazz people, Kenny Garrett's pretty big name in the jazz world as saxophonist. Sammy Nestico is a huge name, has been for many decades. He was the arranger for the Count Basie band, among others, but that's what really kind of made him pretty much the if you ask yourself, well, who's a Baroque composer? Answer Bach. Ask yourself, who's a classic rock band? The Beatles. Well, ask yourself, who's a jazz arranger? Sammy Nestico. He's the guy whose picture you see in the dictionary under jazz big band arranger. And he just died a few days ago, is why I'm going on about him. And so his music is some of the most studied music there is as far as in the jazz world, because it's written down. The arrangements are published. We can look at them. There's a book that I should have on my shelf here, and I need to dig it out. Oh yeah, here it is, Inside the Score. Really nice book by Ray Wright, and it's a book that has in it reproductions of various classic big band arrangements, and starts right off with this one called Basie Straight Ahead by Sammy Nestico. And so it's the original published arrangement, except with Ray's annotations in it, where he's telling you really what's going on in it. And it's a great book for learning jazz arranging techniques. And one of the things that is a Nestico hallmark that is worth pointing out in this context is in this passage here, where you have basically two different passages going on, but you have three instruments, basically unison here. Unison, except I guess an octave for the tenor. A classic Nestico thing to do here, and I'm going to do just a tiny bit of it, is to say I'm going to have a counterpoint texture, because Nestico loved these counterpoint textures. He loves having sections play off against each other. The saxophone section doing one thing, the trumpet section doing a second thing, and then maybe the trombones doing a third thing. And then maybe for most of the chart, there might be at most two things at once, and then somewhere in the chart, maybe there'll be three different things going on at once. But one of the really just classic Nestico things to do is to have, like, if the saxophones are doing one thing and the trumpets are doing something else, pick one of the sections to harmonize. Have the other section in unison. So what do I mean by that? If I take this section here, let me go to the one I want. This is the one I want. So you have two lines in unison. Is unison, or octaves between the alto and tenor. And this is also unison, or octaves. Well, what a classic Nestico trick is to say, I'm going to let one of them be unison. Let the saxophone section be unison or octaves, but take the trumpet part and harmonize it. Create homophony, to use the term I used last time. So if thinking about what's happening here, I'm going to just basically take everything down a third. I could do that all at once. Whoops. I'm just going to go down a third with everything. C. Now it's G. All right. Hopefully you can get a sense of what I'm doing here. All right, I've basically harmonized this thing in thirds. I'm doing this because it's not major thirds, not minor thirds. They're the kind of third I think I want to fit the chord. So I'm going to solo just those two for a moment here, so you can see what that's about. Solo, it's the alto and tenor do. No, it's not. Wrong ones. It's soprano and tenor 1. No, it's not. What am I doing? Yeah, it is. Right? So that idea where they are rhythmically in unison but at different pitch levels within the chord. Again, classic Nestico trick to take one section and harmonize it like that, let the other section be in unison or octaves. Because you could harmonize them both, but it gets to be too dense. At least in a big band, it could be really chaotic. In a saxophone quartet, you could probably get away with harmonizing both of them, and it wouldn't be like ridiculously chaotic. But let's hear what that sounds like here. So anyhow, I just did the 2 bars there. So that basic technique there is it's a good technique to have in your pocket there, and it's not just Sammy Nestico. I'm sure he didn't invent it, but it's a classic big band arranging technique that Nestico certainly used to good effect. And since he just died, and I wanted to have an excuse to talk about him, this piece really kind of gave me that opportunity a little bit by looking at this section where if this were going to be arranged for a big band, I would totally take that melody and give it to the trumpets, probably, because I don't know that I would want to ask the trumpets to go boot and beat it and beat it and bap in harmony. Although maybe that would be cool. Actually, I take it back. That's going to sound great. It's just hard to do as a trumpet player, the embouchure of boot and all those skips, all those arpeggios. It's not impossible, but it would be hard. They would hate you for it, but it would sound awesome. So I would take the saxophones and put them in unison, and then have the trumpet section, or maybe the entire brass section, but harmonized, and then hear that against the original melody, and that would, I think, make a lovely big band texture out of this. So that idea, when you're going to have counterpoint, that sometimes you want to have more actual instruments than the number of voices. One way of doing that is what Michael has done here, of basically letting some of them be unison. Because again, if you just dropped them out, now it's thinner again. I don't want it that thin. So I like the fact that you kept all the instruments in, and the unison is fine. It's a great choice, really. But I just wanted the excuse to talk about the Nestico thing, which is to say, let one of the lines, the most prominent line, be the unison line, and then take one of the other lines to harmonize. And if you're going to have 3 lines, probably have 2 of them unison and 1 of them harmonized. Because again, if you try to harmonize 2 of them, you're risking chaos, because now you've got a lot more. If you thought it was hard to get those 3 lines to all line up when it was just 1 note per line, start harmonizing each one of those, and you have a lot more problems to solve, or you just live with the chaos. So anyhow, that's that. Yeah, I mentioned that I have way more to talk about than there is hours in the day, really. But as far as hours go, I've been going for an hour, and I like to keep it to that at most. So I'm gonna stop talking at this point and just say again, Michael, great job. I know Dean, you had something, and I know a couple other people had things, and we'll just do what we can, and I'll look at what I can when I can, and let's just hear the end of this. Nice. And so here you actually do have that harmonization. That's not a Nestico voicing, but it's a homophony kind of happening here in a way that hasn't necessarily happened a whole lot of other places. So great job on that, and yeah, I'm just looking forward to having more music to be checking out in future weeks, and thanks for being with me this hour. I've had a really good time talking about different aspects about making music, and thanks again, Michael, and you're welcome, and I will see everyone next week, I hope. So until then,